how do we define community? When I was younger, it was where you lived. It was the kids on the street that you lived on and played with and went to school with. But that definition has changed with the internet and especially post-COVID. In this episode, we will talk about how to give back to communities we love and how to create the communities we want. Stay tuned. You're listening to The Purple Stethoscope. I am your host, Devyn Nixon, family nurse practitioner. None of the information in this podcast is sufficient nor intended to diagnose your personal medical issue, but there's a lot to learn, so let's start the show. What's up, y'all? My heart is so full right now. Yesterday, I got to spend the day with a friend that I made at least 7 or 8 years ago. And the beautiful thing about this friendship is that we have watched each other's kids grow up. We have been through these different iterations and interests, and we recorded together like 6 years ago on the podcast, and just it's like one of those friendships where you're just like you can be your whole full self with this person. But here's the kicker: we met in person for the first time yesterday, and we just kept giggling and laughing about the fact that this hasn't happened since we met. I'm bringing this up because we are talking about community and the definition of community. So sociologists have long split community into two core elements: place-based communities, and these are spaces that are rooted in shared physical spaces, geographical proximity, a way of community that enables daily or almost daily interactions and mutual supports, and are often marked by these overlapping relationships. So, your brother is married to my niece, and I work at the hospital with your auntie, this sort of thing. This is one way of thinking about community. We are together because of the spaces, the physical spaces that we inhabit. Another definition, or another core element of this definition, are interest-based communities, right? So we're thinking about run clubs, we're thinking about hiking clubs, book clubs, these communities that are created out of interest. I've been part of a breast cancer support group, the Sierra Sisters. Shout out to y'all, the great work that you do. Because of circumstances that maybe I wasn't interested in getting breast cancer, but I ended up there and found community that was supportive around the diagnosis. So there's two different ways of thinking about community: where we live and who our chosen people are. Now, COVID and the pandemic really was like a second or third wave of this. A little backstory: internet. I remember being in the 7th grade. I'm going to age myself a little bit, but that's okay. And the librarians kind of freaking out about the World Wide Web and would people even use libraries anymore? Side note, I'm so glad that libraries still exist. Every time they come up on my ballot, I very much vote in support of keeping and maintaining our libraries. Get into that a little more later, but that was a shift in the way community was. Prior to the popularity of the internet, my community was literally the kids on my street, my church, my family and relatives. That was community. It was not a lot of degrees of separation. And then the internet starts gaining popularity. We start getting chat rooms. We start seeing forums. We start seeing, much later, different social media sites, MySpace and Black Planet, and the things that we have now, Facebook, Twitter, formerly the app formerly known as Twitter, and on and on. And it kind of changed the way that we would have relationships. So I remember back in 2006, 2007, starting a Yahoo group for women my age that had a lot in common, and we became close, but we weren't seeing each other physically and often. Now, everybody still knew each other. There was some proximity. People were invited to the group because they knew this girl from this community that they were part of, and they knew this woman from this community that we were part of. And we would have these meetups, even though a lot of that community was taking place online. One such community that I think I'll keep nameless for the purposes of the episode because that community kind of fell apart. But the friend that I was with yesterday, I met in an online community almost maybe a decade ago. And the wild thing about that is the closeness that we have been able to have despite never physically meeting. Wild, right? But if you're someone who lives in a community where there's not a lot of representation of any one of your identities, this could be your gender, could be your beliefs, your faith, or another way that you like to gather with people. And that is real community. And to be honest, sometimes that is the community that saves us when we don't have that physical space that we're able to share with folks who really resonate and understand and support us. I can remember growing up, I did not know many people who were lesbian, gay, bisexual. I didn't know many people personally, but as my online connections and community grew, I began to meet more and more people who identified differently than me. And that really broadened the way that I thought. You know what I'm saying? It opened my mind. It helped me to grow as a person. So sometimes the people that we're in physical proximity with, because there's a lot of overlap and a lot of common migration and lineage stories, it can be hard to grow as an individual. That said, our physical communities are still so important. So, I was talking about libraries a minute ago, and that was a third space. And I want to define third space for those who may not be familiar with that term because it's really important as it relates to community. So, the first space or first place is home. A second place or space you would think about is like work, or if you're a youth or a college student, school. So, first space or first place is going to be your home, your house, maybe the street that you live on or your corner of the cul-de-sac or whatever. Your second place is this community that you build or belong to because of where you work or where you go to school. Okay, so you don't have a ton of control over your first place or your first space, especially if you're a minor or youth or an elder or someone on a fixed income or with a disability. We don't have a ton of control on that first space. And this is not a light topic or a light subject at all because we're talking about community. So all of us live somewhere and we came there for a reason. I think very few, well, I shouldn't say very few because I don't have the numbers, but some people live in places that are not that far from where they grew up because relocating requires a lot of resources and planning and connectivity that a lot of folks don't have. So we have communities where people have lived for generations, and that is a first space, your home. Your work community, you have a little more control over because we get to pick our jobs a lot of the times, unless you are in a farming family and you're family owns this farm and your daddy worked on the farm, your granddaddy worked on the farm, you work on the farm. But for a lot of people, we get to choose where we work. And so that's a little bit more control than the first space because there's some choice there. You can decide whether you want to work at the Foot Locker at the mall or the Burger King, or maybe you are able to access education and you train for a trade that puts you in a second space of people who had a similar interest in that trade, right? So there's a little more control over how that second space community gets created. But the third place is an informal public space or gathering. And these are places in between. So, like, think of your cafes and bistros, your barbershops, your parks, your libraries, and community centers. So, when I was coming up, the library was my place. That is where I felt at home. That is where I felt like I belonged. I could read about anything. Okay. I am a reading rainbow child. Okay. So, butterfly in the sky, right? I was taking a look in a book and going any and everywhere because of my third space being the library. And libraries are third spaces today. A lot of times that's where people go to access the internet. That's where folks go to send an email or all different kinds of things. There's so much social communication and things that happen in libraries that I'm a fan. But I digress. In this episode, we're really going to focus on our first spaces and our third spaces, right? So how can we create communities that we love, both in our home where we have to go physically, as well as our chosen third spaces, the spaces that we go to informally gather. Now that we have definitions, let's take a quick break because guess where I am, y'all? I'll give you one guess. Okay, fine, I'll tell you. Where my 14th Amendment people at? I am so excited to be attending my first ever PolicyLink Summit. It's going down just outside of DC at the Gaylord National Resort and Convention Center, August 24 through August 28. The theme this year is We Are the Founders, writing the unfinished story of our democracy. If you see me, say hey. So let's get into creating the community we want. And as I talk about this, I want you to think about both your first space, your home, and where you physically have to go, and your third space, the places that you want to go, your interest groups, those informal public gatherings. So we want to start small and be repetitive, recurring. So this could be like a monthly gathering, like a walk, a book club, a potluck. This is better than doing one big one-off event because the repetition is what builds that community, builds that familiarity, and builds that trust. Now, this is one of those things that may be simple and it also may feel like a heavier lift. This might look like, going on Nextdoor or creating flyers that you post around your neighborhood and say, hey, community walk Saturday, 8 a.m. Just bring yourself and we're just going to walk up and down our street, or we're going to walk, one square block or something to get people moving and to get people together. There may be something that already exists, and that's beautiful when that happens because then you can just jump in, join in, and start building that trust and familiarity in a community that's really accessible to you. There's a podcast called Girl Trek, and I love this podcast. I love what they do. There's some really great episodes about getting to walk around your community, being responsible for your community, picking up the garbage, getting to know the neighbors, all of those things. They do an excellent job of talking about that. And so I'll put the link to that podcast in the show notes. Love, love, love that work. Another thing that you could consider is hosting a third place. Now, this would be inviting people into a low pressure, no agenda space. This is like the meetups, right? Where you have interest or something that's common and bringing the people together. If you have kids and they play sports, maybe it looks like walking the track at the high school during the kids' volleyball practice and getting to know the other moms. Maybe it looks like just doing a cookout. This is something that we love doing, my husband and I, doing a community cookout where you just invite all your people and they don't have to do nothing but come, bring something to share, to throw on the grill, and everybody just hang out. These are things that you can do as one-offs or you can do repetitively. But this isn't necessarily going to be where you live or even in your city. This could be a whole other type of club, right? Or type of, club is a word that we're all familiar with. But low pressure means you don't have to have a membership, you don't have to sign up, things of that nature. There is a group called Black Women Connect Vancouver. It is a little group that I just love. They meet in Vancouver, BC. I live very close to Canada. And, you go and there's curated events surrounding community interest. So I've been to a brunch, been to spin class, just different things to get into as folks who share an identity. These are things that we really want to keep low barrier. So free or low cost, drop-in friendly with no long-term commitments required. The goal is really to mitigate that social isolation. So we're bringing people out, inviting people out into a space surrounding a shared interest or shared identity. Now, I want to shift gears and talk about giving back to the community that you love. If you happen to live in a place or be in a community that you adore and you realize, gosh, I have been benefiting from this community for a while and I'm now in a position where I have more space or more time in my life and I can give back. We're going to talk about that next. But first, I need to know if you've registered for the North Sound Race and Health Equity Conference. This is part of work that I get to do in creating a community I love, and I'd love to see you there. I can hardly believe it's almost time for the 6th annual North Sound Race and Health Equity Conference. This year, we're talking about advancing health equity through mutual aid with keynote speaker PolicyLink. Together, we will examine how grassroots reciprocal support systems can help address long-standing health inequities in our region. Join us if you are a clinician, a healthcare administrator, student, public health nurse, community health worker, or anyone engaged in caring for your community. For more information, see the link in the show notes. All right, so I'm going to run the clock back 19 years when I moved to my city pregnant. And at that time, I had small children. My third was on the way. I was pretty much still a newlywed, early years of marriage. And I was looking for a community that I could belong to, right? So that I could feel that social connection in my newfound home. Fast forward 19 years, I've been here for a while. I know a lot about the area, who's here, and I've been in different tax brackets in my time here. So I know the struggles of being a young family, but I've also reached a space in my life where I'm not raising kids anymore, and there is a little more control over my time, and I'm able to give back to the community. And so I want to talk about that next. For people who are in that space of your life, let me tell you something. When the kids move out, that's a totally different kind of social isolation. It is completely different social isolation And just to be clear, social isolation can come in multiple different flavors. When you're the first in your friend group to be having babies or the last to be having babies, that's a form of social isolation because your friends are like, we can't invite you because you're not going to be able to come or you've got the baby. Or you get on the other side of it and you're like, yeah, I want to kick it with so and so, but I'm not feeling like doing toddlers today. And so we end up in these different times and frames of life, from looking for belonging to being able to give back. And let's just talk about a couple of things that those of us who love the communities we live in can do to give back, or if you have that space and time and capacity open up in your life and you're feeling a little more isolated. Maybe you've been through a divorce, maybe your kids have left home, maybe you have lost a parent. A significant amount of time in my life opened up after my mother passed away, because I didn't even realize how much of my time I spent, just being with my mom. No regrets, but huge void afterwards. So, mentorship is something that I'm just going to highlight right out of the gate. Mentorship is tricky because we don't often think of ourselves as mentors. I know I don't. I don't think of myself as someone with life experience and work experience that can mentor the next generation, but I promise you, you probably are. No matter what your age is, you can mentor someone who's younger than you, on a similar trajectory educationally or professionally. But mentorship is not just about age. One of my most impactful mentors is younger than me, which is so cool to me because there is a level of ambition and confidence and freedom that, I just never was able to tap into, or wasn't at a certain time. And so I've learned a lot of that from younger mentors. Mentorship is one-on-one time. It can be office hours, career guidance, it could be shadowing. It matters a lot to folks who might be isolated rather than like this large scale volunteering, okay? Gatekeeping is real. Think about what you do. Think about some of your skills and your talents, how you obtained those. For many of us, it was one or two people in our lives who saw something in us and decided that they would partner with us to nurture that something. Okay. It can also be like skill sharing. Teach something that you know, a wellness practice, a professional skill in a community setting. This can double as that third space, building connection for both folks who are teaching and folks who are learning a new skill. As someone who works with elderly people, I have to say, these folks are so full of knowledge, of wisdom, of experience, and also isolated. Also isolated, and not necessarily isolated from each other, because they've got all kind of pickleball clubs and all kind of, senior gatherings. Shout out to my auntie and senior splash day down in Georgia. But a lot of times they're isolated from us. So we, as a younger generation to them, are going through and trying to navigate things as if they've never happened before, as if nobody in the history of humans has had to go through that thing. And it's wild because that wisdom is living and breathing and walking among us. So maybe you're an older person and maybe you have a skill that you've noticed is dying. Can I just make a suggestion? If I had more time and capacity, I would teach cursive. I would teach writing to young people. There's a whole generation of people who do not have a signature. This is something that our elders had classes on, took classes. I myself may or may not have. Now, I'm not that old, but I did have writing in school. Cursive writing was a subject. It was in the third grade. It was very difficult to write two cursive R's side by side in my maiden name, but I digress. All kinds of skill sharing, and it may seem like something that's not important to you or not that big of a deal to you, but a lot of time mentoring can look like, okay, I'm teaching these kids cursive, right? but more relationship comes up. They start to open up, they start to share, and you or we have this wisdom. The teacher has this wisdom that they can offer those kids. Sometimes mentorship can look like coaching. Shout out to my man, Coach Extraordinaire. I can remember when I was a Boys and Girls Club basketball coach, when my kids were younger, how we would have this hour-long practice once or twice a week. And the kids would really start to open up to you and share some things. And there were some kids dealing with some traumatic stuff. But we would have an agreement, we're going to be together for the next hour. And for the next hour, we don't have to focus on any of that home stuff. The adults are adulting, and sometimes in the eyes of a child, that looks crazy and can feel chaotic. But this was our time to come together, learn a new skill, and not have to think about what was going on at home. So really think about what you have to offer as a community member in your stage of life with the experiences that you have, and that could make a huge difference in someone's life. I also think in some ways this is like an antidote to depression. Depression is a real chemical imbalance. It is a true diagnosis that sometimes requires medication and psychotherapy. But I also think there are some lifestyle things that we can do to help with depression that can sometimes be situational and from social isolation. And this is a great way to help yourself while helping others. We're going to Detroit. That's right, DNPs of Color 6th Annual Conference is taking place in Detroit, Michigan, October 15 through 18. The theme this year is Designing Our Collective Future, Igniting Community and Driving Innovation. When it comes to DNPs of Color, we're just not colleagues, we're family. If you know, you know. And if you don't know, you better ask somebody. Well, I guess you better register for the conference and come find out for yourself. If you see me, say hey. Couple more things you can do to give back to the community you love and create the community you want. Showing up in your institutional spaces. I'm talking about serving on boards, which we talked about a little bit last episode, committees or advisory groups. This is like civic engagement, right? It's a quieter but powerful form of giving back and participating in your community. I always tell people, think about organizations that you really love and support, maybe organizations that have helped you in the past, and see if they have a position open on their board. Learning how these organizations are funded, how they're governed, is a huge skill that is underrated. And I think a lot of times boards have, your typical board members, lawyers, and retirees and, finance people. But one thing that these organizations really need is community voice. They need to have people on the boards who are the end user, who are the consumer of whatever service that they're putting out there. So board service or a advisory group, these kind of committees are great ways to give back. Use your platform to amplify others. Share into your stories community members' work rather than just your own stuff, right? Sharing out gatherings that you like to attend or you would like to help promote. Again, sometimes people aren't showing up to things because they just don't know about it, but you may be the bridge to their social connection. And social media is a great way to do that, as well as any other platforms that you may have. Now, advocating structurally is, I think, one of those things that feels really intimidating when you're not sure how to go about doing it. And it's simple, but there is some things that you need to understand and know before you can really get involved in structural advocacy or changing policy or institutional changes, either for a specific group that you identify with or in your community. But that, my friends, will require a whole other episode. And so I will see you back to talk more on this next week. Thank you for listening to the Purple Stethoscope podcast. I am your host, Devyn Nixon, family nurse practitioner. If you liked what you heard, why not subscribe or share this episode with a friend or family member? You can also support the podcast by rating and reviewing. You can find me on Instagram at DNP and right here at the Purple Stethoscope.